You're listening to 515, the Ultraman podcast, the show that invites you into the lives of people who make up the Ultra family. Here's your host for these conversations, Larry Ryan.
Thank you, MJ. Today I have just one Ohana guest join me on 515. Nick Mallett has been around this scene since the early 90s, so he has great perspective and even greater stories. And, speaking of stories, Steve King is back with one as well. Just before our Ohana guest today, I would like to remind listeners to go to the 515 Facebook page and vote for your favorite bucket list race in the March Madness Ultra Race Bracket Pool. My idea for this was so good, it has been used by the big M Dot on their Facebook page. Starting next Monday, it will be down to the Elite 8. So I hope that your favorite race is still in. Please vote and share those Facebook posts with your friends until we get down to the one race that wins it all. Today's guest has lived a life which has perfectly bridged the gap between the 1960s hippies and today's social media nomadic Gen Zers. You might even say that he is the OG of the Gen Z life. His adulting is the blueprint for hashtag life goals. Since graduating high school, he has been traveling the world on a whim, popping up in different corners of the globe and trekking the roads less traveled. Stopping only to recover from being hit by cars, to renew visas, or to share drinks and stories with the triathlon and ultra triathlon elites. Although he has been blogging and posting to social media since Gen Zers were still in Gen Xers, he has yet to monetize his couch surfing lifestyle. For race profiles, he lists his occupation as Vagabond. Joining me from the land of such unique animals as wombats, quokkas, and kangaroos, an equally unique animal, Nick Mallett. Welcome, Nick.
Hi, good morning.
So where exactly in Australia are you joining me from today?
I'm in sunny Queensland. I'm 10 miles south of Noosa, which is, for those who don't know Queensland, I'm just north of Brisbane. So on the east coast, on the Sunshine Coast.
Excellent. So you're having a good summer over there?
Thankfully, summer's finishing. For us here in Queensland, winter's the best season. I know you Canadians hate to hear that, but yeah, we're finally finished with our summer storms and it's starting to cool down, which is what we like.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And even though you're Australian, I understand you were not born there. You were born in Hong Kong. Is that correct?
That's right. I was born and raised in Hong Kong.
And what was going on in the Mallett family in those early years that had you born in Hong Kong?
My father was working for Otis Elevators in Sydney, and he won a scholarship, for want of a better word, in 1957 to go to Singapore, where Otis Asia was based. And so to get my mother over there, they had to get married. So they got married. She was very young and moved to Singapore in 1957 and then Hong Kong in 59. And they were there all the way through to 1980.
And what was life like growing up in Hong Kong then, as an Australian?
Well, a lot of Hong Kong was divided into different sections. So you had we were about 2% of the population, non-Chinese. And that was divided again into those working for the government service and those working for private companies. And we were in the private company section. It very, very difficult to explain the lifestyle in Hong Kong at the time. Very, very privileged. That word gets thrown around a lot these days. But if you want to know the epitome of white privilege, that was us. Country clubs, servants, drivers, the whole business.
And did you go to a special school for the company people or the government people?
Yeah, I went to a British primary school, and I never went to secondary school in Hong Kong. I went to boarding school in Australia. So at the age of 12, I decided to join my two brothers who were already at school in Australia. And so I would fly backwards and forwards 3 times a year to go to school.
And what was boarding life like for you?
I loved it. I went to a school called Geelong Grammar, which is quite famous here in Australia, and it's famous in the UK. Prince Charles went there, and it's a lot of prime ministers, a few kings. It's one of these massive, what in England would be called public schools. In Australia, it's called a private school, and heavily focused on sport, heavily. So much so in 9th grade, what you guys would call 9th grade, we would call 3rd form. They send the entire year to live in a campus in the Australian mountains, and the whole year is focused on outdoor sports and running, culminating in the last day of school of an 18-mile cross-country run. So we're 14 years old doing this sort of stuff.
Oh, wow. And
yeah.
And did that turn you on more to your sporting life then? Like that was the part that you enjoyed?
Yeah. I would go back there tomorrow. It was, you hear about the whole Boys Own manual or the Boy Scouts. Well, we lived it for a full year. It was amazing. And
then did you have one of the triathlon disciplines that you worked on a lot there? Like obviously you did some cross country. Was swimming a big part of it? I'm guessing cycling wasn't. How did you get to the cycling?
In Hong Kong, my mother was the swimming convener for the Shekou Golf and Country Club. And so we had an annual swimming carnival. And at the Royal Hong Kong Golf Club as well, they organized a swimming carnival there. So I was always a swimmer in Hong Kong. And when I turned up to Australia, I immediately was put on a swim team, so I've been swimming since I was little, competitively. And then running in Timbertop, so 9th grade, became a big deal for me. I did very well in a lot of the cross-country running. So everything was done. So I was a swimmer and I was a runner. I was a better runner then than I am now. I'm not well known for being a runner in triathlon circles now. The biking came later.
Okay. Yeah, you and I, we first met in 2010 when my ex Lucy was doing her first Ultraman Canada in Penticton. And you were like the first Ohana member that we met. We went into Peach City Runners to check in with Steve Brown. And I believe you were just hanging out in the back office, which I think is probably one of your Penticton flop houses. And Lucy was terrified going into the first Ultraman, especially with the swim. And you were nice enough to meet us down at Skaha Beach later that day and swim with Lucy and talk to both of us and share some of your experience and give your advice. And I think that's when Lucy first realized that this ultra thing was way different from Ironman. And I know that you've done that probably hundreds of people, either in person or answering their questions on Slowtwitch and things like that. And I think you're probably the perfect person to do it. Just looking at your resume, you've competed in 10 5:15 distance races. You've won 2 of them. You've placed second in another one. You've crewed another 5 times. You've done doubles. You've done triples, quintuples, and nearly 30 Ironman distance races. So with all that ultra stuff for you, I understand kind of started back in 1993 with the first Ultraman Canada. When you were crewing, can you tell us a little bit about how ultra started for you with that first Ultraman Canada in 1993?
Yeah, I guess it really started in 1991. You've got to go, which was my first Ironman, and that was in Penticton. So I went over there. A friend of mine in Cairns, where I was living here in Australia at the time, he had literally knocked on my door 4 weeks before Ironman Canada and said, "Do you want to go to Canada?" And this is back in the days. There was no email. There was no social media, none of that sort of stuff. And I'd been hit by a car earlier in the year. I was supposed to do Australian Ironman, couldn't do it. But I was training. I didn't even have a proper bike shoes or a proper bike or anything. And Lloyd said to me, "Look, I'll train you. You can buy my bike." And so that's how it started. And we then raised a bunch of money, went to Penticton, and met a bunch of people, including Steve King. on that trip. So when I rocked up to train for Ironman Canada in 1993, one of the guys we met, Maury LaChapelle, who owned a restaurant in Penticton, contacted me and said, listen, Steve Brown and Steve King want us to crew for this guy. His name's Tom Price. He won Ironman here twice. Are you up for it? And we were like, sure, why not? Let's do it. And knew nothing about Ultraman at all, zero. Yeah, so that's how crewing for Tom started.
Yeah, and he won that race, correct?
Yeah, that's right. Tom turned up on the Thursday. He was living in Redmond in Washington, and he drove up on the Thursday with his vehicle and met us and promptly instructed us, this is how you do it. He wrote everything down. He made it idiot-proof for us. And he wrote lists, and he had all these little boxes full of different clothing for different weather and different food and all that. And he said, this is what you do. Don't ask any questions. Don't get creative. Do what I tell you, and it'll work. And it did. He came and he won. It was pretty amazing, but as I've said before, Tom Price taught me everything I need to know about Ultraman racing and crewing.
Yeah, and that would come in handy because the following year in 1994, you ended up getting into the Ultraman race. Can you tell us a little bit about how that came about?
Yeah, I was living back in my girlfriend and I had stayed in Penticton and then moved to Kelowna for the winter. Came back to Penticton for the summer, and we were living in what was known as the House of Iron, Dave Bullock's house. And for those who don't know Dave Bullock, he was the pro liaison for a lot of years for Ironman Canada and then became race director. And he had a townhouse at the southern end of Penticton, which was a flop house for all the traveling triathletes. And so it was called the House of Iron. And Lisa, my girlfriend at the time, and I were living there. We'd been to Margarita Thursday at the pub up the street, and we came back. We're ready for Tom. He'd got full sponsorship to do the 1994 race. But as is common in Penticton, there's fires. It was a fire year, and Tom's an asthmatic. And so he apparently had contacted Maury and said, I can't come. I can't deal with the smoke. I'm out. So when Lisa and I got home from the pub with too many margaritas in us, this is again on the Thursday night, I got a message from Maury. I called him and he said, Tom's not coming. And I said, well, bummer. What are we going to do? And he said, do you want to do it? And I'm like, what? He said, it's all paid for. Do you want to do it? So I said, sure. And that was it. I entered 30 hours before the start.
And is that the latest you ever entered an Ultraman, or did you end up entering any even later than that?
No, that was the latest. I've registered later than that. I've registered at the beach before the swim start. But I have, that was the latest I'd actually officially entered.
Tell us a little bit about how that race went for you.
Yeah, it was interesting. Obviously, I was always a swimmer. And I remember a lot of the triathletes in Penticton telling me, you're an idiot. What are you doing? And you got to remember the first two runnings of Ultraman Canada were different than they are now.
Distances, yeah.
Yeah, different distances. So Penticton had now it's been resurrected, the Skaha Lake Ultra Swim. And so that's essentially 12 Ks. It's 11.8 kilometers from shore to shore, the length of the lake. So Steve Brown wanted like a bucket list event. And so the swim, Tom joined the actual official race. And then he did the next day was 200 Imperial, a double century Imperial. And then day 3 is the double marathon. And that was 3 bucket list events rolled into one weekend. So that was 1994. That's what we did. But with the fires, the water bombers were using Skaha Lake, so we couldn't swim. And so we went to Okanagan Lake and just did laps from the Peach to the Sycamoose and back. I think it was 12 laps for the 11.8K swim. Yeah. So for me, I got out of the water first by a long margin. I had a huge lead, which was very surprising to me. I didn't realize I could do that. And then, I remember going afterwards with Ian Jackson, who's a veteran, because Ultraman Canada wasn't the first ultra distance in Penticton. There had been one 3 years earlier, in 1991. A different brand, different name, but Ian had competed. So, we went to lunch, and he's like, "Who the hell are you?" I'm like, "I got no idea." And it just worked out. We started day 2, off we went. There was a guy in Penticton called Lee Crockett, who was a triathlon character, and he was one of the officials. And all I wanted to do was just finish 320 kilometers. I'd never done it before. And we were riding, and the hot favorite was a guy called Berend Henkel, who'd done well the previous year. And he blew up. I passed him, and going back in about 70 Ks, I suppose, before the wall. And he said, "It's yours." And I remember climbing the wall with Steve King and an American called Jim Brazil. And we were riding through Willowbrook. And I remember asking Steve, "Can I just pass you guys so I can say I've led this thing once?" And I passed them both and never saw them again. And I won day 2 as well. 10.5 hours for the 320 Ks. And by that stage, I had a massive lead over Steve and Ian. It was almost 2 hours.
Which you would have needed to beat Steve on the run.
Well, considering Steve and Ian at that time, Steve had been on the Canadian 100-kilometer running team, right, and Ian was on the 100-kilometer running team. And so he was competing like a month later at the World Championships. And so, I needed to run well. And so I ran with Jimmy Brazil, who had also done the previous year. And Jim said, "What's your tactics?" And I said, "Well, I figure you're trying to beat me. So if I just run with you, you'll run me far enough so Steve and Ian physically can't make up the time." And I knew with about 5 kilometers to go that they couldn't get me. Right. And I started walking. I was a mess. But I ended up winning by, I think, 37 minutes. And Steve came second and Ian came third.
Yeah. And that made you Australia's first Ultraman champion.
That's right. Yeah, first finisher and first champion. Yeah. Yeah, it was interesting because back then no one knew in Australia about Ultraman.
Right. Yeah. Now you said that you decided to walk it in once you figured that you had it won. But I've also heard, is it true that you also have the record for the smallest time gap loss at an ultra try?
Yeah, we share it actually. There's 4 of us. We had a race in Australia in 1999. It was a 3-day thing, same as Ultraman, but different distances. And so the first morning was a 15-kilometer swim. And that night we start a 400K ride through the night. And then the next night it's a 100K run. So one of the original Australian ultra guys, he was the first guy to do a double Ironman way back in 93. I think he did it in Huntsville, Alabama. So I won the swim by 45 minutes. He took 45 minutes out of me on the bike. And so I started the 100K run with an 11-second lead. And he beat me. He beat me by 30 seconds, which meant by the end of 30 hours, I'd lost by 19 seconds.
That's insane. Insane to think that would come down to such a small amount.
Well, the first thing, and I know Paul's a friend of mine. His name's Paul Every. And he had lost previously in that race to the Englishman, Bobby Brown, who's everyone knows from back in the day, English Deca guy, 24-hour record holder and all that stuff. And he was waiting for me at the finish, and he said, "Please don't try to figure out where you could have made up 19 seconds. It'll kill you." So I took that advice. But we're not the only ones, because Curtis Flock, lost by 19 seconds
Oh yeah.
in Penticton as well at Ultraman to Scott Beasley. Serious I've ever seen Curtis in a race, because that was the year I believe he took the day 2 bike record, and so Scott was way in front at the run, and Curtis was really struggling to get to the finish line. And I remember standing with Scott Beasley at the finish line, and we're all kind of counting it down, and there was no smiling like Curtis does normally. There was no high-fiving, no chatting up the girls on the way. It was he was trying to get there, and he lost by 19 seconds.
It's odd that you would have that same 19 seconds in an ultra as the the worst time gap loss. It's like the 27 club.
Yeah, but it's I've thought about it, but what can you do? It is what it is.
Yeah.
I remember thinking when they handed the trophies out in Canberra for my one, I remember thinking, I'm really glad I didn't win, because I had to fly back to Cairns where I was living, and the first place trophy was a massive framed picture, like huge. Oh, yeah. And I thought, how would I get that on the plane, where the second place was just a big trophy, so I could deal with that.
Silver linings.
Yeah.
Now, throughout your ultra career, you have been known to kind of just ruck up without training once in a while, or coming off of some crazy trek that you've done. Maybe not always like making that your destination race of the year. So do you have more finishes or more DNFs at 5:15 distances?
It's an even split.
Oh.
Yeah, 5 and 5.
5 and 5.
Actually, I think I might be 6 DNFs and 5 finishes. And for a while, I thought I had the world record for the most DNFs at a 5:15, and until I went through the results in Hawaii and found that Cowman has got me beaten. He's got like 9.
Yeah. I know that your first one occurred at Ultraman Canada in 2006, and that was one of those cases where prior to the race you were on one of your cycling treks. Can you tell us a little bit about what you were doing prior to that race?
I was actually really fit. That was 2006, as you said. Curtis and I had been in South America cycling. So we started in Buenos Aires, and we ended up going our separate ways after 3 weeks. It's just a different mindset of what to do when you're cycle touring. But I actually spent 12 weeks cycling through the Andes, a month of that in La Paz. So I got medevaced out of La Paz because I got pulmonary edema from training too hard at altitude. So I had to wait till I was fit to fly, went to Miami to recover, and then went to Penticton for Ultraman. The thing was, I was super fit, like really, really fit. It was the lightest I've ever been. I remember standing on the scales at Peach City Runners at 149 pounds, ready to go. But this DNF you can blame Steve Brown for, because I was spending a lot of time at the Brown house, and Steve had a stomach bug. And so I remember Maria, his wife, for those who don't know, Steve and Maria, had said to me, keep away from him, he's really sick. And so Steve had been really ill. He'd lost a lot of weight with diarrhea and vomiting. And I'm like, I'm fine, I'm fit. And so rolling up to day 3, in between day 2 and day 3, that race, in the middle of the night, it hit me. And I remember getting in my van, my crewmate, Glenn Pryor from Cairns, he looked at me and said, are you all right? I remember I was actually crying because I said, of all the races, this was the one I was fittest for. And I knew I wouldn't win because Darren Bentley was doing his thing. Darren had won the Heaney to Harrison and a few other big races. And but I knew I had second place, and I was actually running with Darren in the event before I started projectile vomiting and that was one of my legitimate, wow, this guy's really sick. And it was Steve King, I think, who finally made the call. I remember I took a big hit of Gatorade and then just vomited it straight up. And Steve just said, no, you're done. So then I was taken off course and back to Penticton.
Yeah. Those things will happen when you do enough of these. Not every day ends up being your best. Yeah.
I think legitimately 3 of them were injury DNFs, and probably a couple I shouldn't have been on the start line in the first place. But it was more social than anything.
Exactly. Yeah. Once you can say you were the champion, the rest of them, that's okay.
yeah, that's the point.
So maybe you can just share some of your other point-to-point biking treks that you've done, in case someone listening wants to get in touch with you and get some advice on some routes or some things that you've done. We can try and come back around to these in a little bit if we have some time. But maybe just like, what were the starting and ending points of some of your bigger treks that you've done?
I've done the Australian East Coast, which is about 3,000. Before my very first triathlon in 1986, I did that. So that was Kansas to Sydney. I've done the East Coast a few times now. I've done Buenos Aires in Argentina to La Paz in Bolivia. I've done Anchorage to Calgary. I've done all the Canadian maritime provinces. I started riding from Vancouver down to Oregon to do the double Ironman, and then back to Penticton. Things like that. I've done a lot of like those sort of point-to-point places.
Mm-hmm. And that's all just part of your training for those races?
Yeah, training and a little bit of fun, because I lost my enthusiasm, I suppose you could call it, for training once the whole coaching era turned up, and the fun got sucked out of the sport for me. So I just decided that, I wanted to get on the road and see some things.
Yeah. And how is it exactly that you're able to live your Vagabond lifestyle and travel the world with no discernible means of income?
It's most people don't have a clue what I do. For most of what I do, my background's hotels. So I work for Hilton International, Regent, various hotel chains. I think 6 different major hotel chains over the years in the food and beverage supervisory positions and management roles. And for a lot of these jobs, like, for example, when I moved to Cairns, it was easier for me to take 2 months off than to take 3 weeks off. So I could go away for 2 months and they could just replace me with a qualified person, and just on a short-term contract or whatever. And then I could just come back and it was all good. And when I started working casually, it became even easier. I ran a couple of cocktail bars, and it was just easy to throw 2 backpackers in to replace me while I went away for the summer. So I think I crossed the Pacific 19 times to events. I used to have customers would ask me the very same thing. They say, "How can you afford to do it?" I say, "Well, I'm single and I'm not sitting at the bar spending $100 a night drinking."
Yeah.
And so you do the math and it works out that my lifestyle is cheaper than yours.
That's great. As I said earlier, one of the ways in which you give back is to offer advice and commentary on Slowtwitch quite a bit. I believe you have a couple handles on there. Can you share those for us?
My current one's Thailand Ultras. Mm-hmm. And there's a bunch of people who know me know it, but I was banned from Slowtwitch twice. And so that's why I had to change my name. Dan Emfield, the owner of Slowtwitch, banned me twice for disrupting the flow of the place. But we're all good about that now, and so he knows who I am, and there's a bunch of guys who have old school triathletes know who I am, and through my Thailand connection. Right. So it's Thailand Ultras. That's me.
Okay.
And now here's another Steve King story.
Hi everyone, Steve King here with you once again, talking about Ultraman and talking about world champions and world championships. But today I'm going to talk about a person who never quite won the world title. However, he tried on many occasions. He's a former officer in the Royal Canadian Air Force. He was always near the top of his game and still is as an age grouper at Ironman distances, especially in places like Mont Tremblant, where he now has a home as well. But his first time on the Big Island, and he's only raced on the Big Island at the Ultraman distances, but has done so on 9 different occasions. And the first time was in 2002, when he came second overall to Gordo Byrne, no less, a fellow Canadian. He did 24, 27, 37 that year. 2003, he was second once again to Alexandre Ribeiro, who in the end won 6 world titles, the Brazilian. 2004, second again to the great Swede, Jonas Kolting, and did a 22:24:03 clocking. 2008, he was back on the island and raced to a second once again to Alexandre Ribeiro, the Brazilian. And that year he did a 22:31:54. So talk about consistency. However, he had a couple of other things going on during the next couple of years, because 2006, he actually did the race across America and came 9th overall there, learned a lot of lessons. And I must say, when he trained for that, he did things like 48 hours on his wind trainer, no less. He did also race the race across America one more time, did that in 2010 and came 4th place overall. So he certainly learned from his experiences there. So we moved to 2012 when he went back to the Big Island, and that time he placed a 4th overall. And that was to Ribeiro once again, and that year he did a 25:56:29. 2014, he came 3rd to the great duo of German Tobias Wienermuller and the great late Australian Craig Percival. That year, he did a 23:44:29 clocking. And what was amazing, too, was there was just 16 minutes and 15 seconds separating the top 3, Wienermuller, Percival, and this gentleman. 2015, he was back on the Big Island once again. This time, by now, he's in the 50-plus division as well. And it was another fellow Canadian, Mike Coughlin, who won that year. But this year, this man in 2015 did 23:44:30 to take first in that 50-plus division. 2016, he was back on the island. And then another amazing performance. He was 3rd overall, did 23:22:31. He was 55 years of age. He set a world best in the 50 to 59 division by 9 minutes and 36 seconds, and an Ultraman World Championship best in that division by 19 minutes and 36 seconds. Do you think maybe we'd seen the last of him then? That was his 8th time. No, he came back in 2017 and took a 4th place to Rob Gray. And that year, he won his age division once again. Remember, he's 56 years of age, and he won that 50 to 59 division. Another amazing time, 23:42:59. So this gentleman has had some amazing people support him. He's one of a great crew of athletes that have been part of the Canadian military, including his friends, Dan Botten, Marty Raymond. He's helped out with certain foundations and groups like Soldier On and Wounded Warriors. He's had 2 star generals on his team. 2-star General Mike Ward was one of his crew, and 4-star General Tom Lawson was also on his crew. But of course, you've got to thank his amazing wife, Jackie Cowley, for doing so much work for him and with him as crew, along with great Canadians like Gil and Arlene Ayub, who have been there a number of times. But he's still very much involved, now retired, but loves to cycle, loves to put on training camps. As I said, moved to Mont Tremblant so he could do that. He is bilingual, but presently racing up a storm when he can, but also cycling up a lot of great climbs there in Italy and throughout Europe. And the man I'm referring to with this incredible record on the Big Island, Tony O'Keefe.
Thank you, Steve, for that story, and for doing the updates live from Ultraman Florida and Ultraman Arizona. If listeners want to hear the day-by-day reports of those races, they are available in the 515 library. Well, let's get back to the second part of my conversation with Nick. who incidentally also has a story about Tony. And then on there and through other media, you've certainly not shied away from openly discussing some of the political things that happen in the sport, perhaps leading to getting banned and things like that. But, like, you've been around for a long time with this scene. You know all the major players very well. You've been friends with everyone, Ultra Mama Jane, Dave and Cheryl Cobb, Steve Brown, Steve King, all the race directors, past and present. You've helped Steve Brown organizing his Ultraman race. You helped Tony Horton get the 2015 Ultraman Australia off. And you've appeared in Jim Gorley's book, The Race Within, as well, a number of times, and around some of these things that are going on. You were quoted in there as saying that Jane and Cheryl's views are overly sentimental and happy-clappy. First of all, do you think that Jim's book was an accurate account of what was happening at the time? And is your portrayal in it accurate as well?
I think Jim, by the very nature of the way his plan for that book was very pro-Hawaii. I think my portrayal, 100%. He was spot on. And I met Jim at Ultraman Canada that year, the year he was doing his little tour writing that book. And he knew me through Slowtwitch. And so when I walked into registration, he's like, "Yeah, you're Nick, aren't you?" And I'm going, "Yeah, you're." And it was like, but we ended up, having a really good conversation. And a lot of it wasn't about racing. It was about, like, he's ex-military, about depression and PTSD, and so we came to a consensus about what I was doing, but I think he was unfair to Steve and Tony. Truly, I think he was. There's probably 90% facts, but there was definitely a leaning towards the Hawaiians in the coverage of that book.
In what way? For people that maybe haven't read the book yet, what were you referring to there?
I think Tony was portrayed as someone who was trying to disrupt what the Hawaiians were doing, because at that time, where everyone was trying to, the Ultraman was trying to expand, and I think Tony was seen to be a little bit too powerful. Like he's got money, so I think there was a concern that they were trying with Steve to move the power base for Ultraman away from Hawaii, and Jim, to get access. The Jane had been very strict about who has media access to Hawaii. Quite rightly, it was her race at the time, and so she has banned TV crews. She's banned in the past. She's had an incident with an Irish rock star and his crew. They're very, very strict. And so Jim was playing by the rules. And the whole point of his book was through Hilary Biscay doing Ultraman that year, and ended up being with Craig Percival as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Lucy and I actually crewed for Tony at the 2014 Ultraman Canada when this was happening.
Yeah, I think a lot of the animosity towards Tony, and I know through a friend of mine, Al McPherson, the Scottish ultra triathlete, that Tony wasn't perceived very well by a lot of the guys in the UK. And I said, well, he's a Australian Special Forces guy, and you guys are all, paras. So there's going to be a conflict. Tony does things the way he does things because he is Special Forces. And I see it every day. Every time I'm with him, I can see it, the way he handles people. And a lot of people don't like that. Mm-hmm. So they I don't agree with everything Tony's done, believe me, but we are friends, and I understand the guy. He's helping Van in Mexico, Van Sanchez in Mexico a lot right now.
Yeah. We had Van Sanchez on in the season 1, and he's a great guy. Like, just listening to
Yes.
him, and it's interesting because he's very much about the Ohana and the spirit of the race, and I think
Yeah.
he's one of those guys that would like to see the races more connected.
Yeah, I think if you look at all the Latin American guys, they're all the same. Like, I have a fair bit to do with the Brazilians, and obviously I spent 2 weeks living in Van Sanchez's house in Fresnillo when I went to help 1 year for his race.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's the new race in the Dominican Republic that they want to start. So they're all, in many ways, more leaning towards the values of Ohana than the Hawaiians themselves. And you're right, they do hope that one day, everyone can like, kiss and make up. And that's what Tony did. Tony, when all this began, when Steve separated and Tony started Ultraman in Australia, Tony could have gone with Steve and do a 520. But I know, we talked about it, and I was going, what are you doing? And he said, I believe we can all get back together. And he honestly believed that he could. He believed that through Ultraman Australia, he could then get everyone back together and one big happy family. And at the end of the day, it didn't work.
Yeah. Do you see where do you see the future going?
This leads to a mini challenge for Cheryl and Dave. I would hate to see Ultraman Hawaii World Champions become irrelevant. I would hate that. But the further away you go from that race, the more irrelevant it's becoming to the masses, because there are so many other races in the world. I would like to see two things. I would like to see them drop the requirement for everyone to do an official Ultraman. The reason I say that is because a lot of these people are from second and third world countries, and Ultraman's expensive. So to force someone who's living in Mexico, Fresnillo, for example, or in Rio or wherever, to do an Ultraman in the US or Canada to qualify and then go again. So that's paying twice. They can do their own hometown races. And if Cheryl decided, okay, once we're full of all the guys that have applied through the Ultraman races, maybe we'll start to be inviting some other guys that haven't done it. They've done it before. They've done it with Kate Bevilacqua. They did it with Hilary Biscay, David Goggins, Rich Roll. They never qualified. So it is, and I know when Kate Bevilacqua wanted to do Hawaii, I actually emailed them, and I don't think I'm very popular over there, but I emailed them and I said, hey, come on, she's a pro. You guys need the media. And yeah, and so Kate got in. But that's one thing I would like to see, that maybe they soften the stand, and instead of, there are so many Ultraman races, I think there's like 6 in Mexico alone, there's 4 in Spain. So the need to go to Hawaii to complete one has gone. But I would, as I said, I would hate to see the World Championships become a novelty event.
Yeah. We started this part of the discussion by talking about how active you've been on social media and discussing ultras, and people who know you, they always get a little bit scared if you go dark off of social media for a while, because like many others in this community, as you've mentioned earlier, you have struggled with your mental health from time to time, and you've had suicidal thoughts. How's your mental health today?
I manage all of that. It's difficult because I've been talking about it for so long. It started affecting me in the year 2000. But as you said, I've written a few blogs with my trips, and that helps. Those long trips are part of it. You need a purpose in life, and now I have no family. I'm here alone. So I have to find a purpose in life. And so that's how I manage it.
So putting those treks or ultra races on the horizon, putting something there to get to, is that what you mean?
That's right. Yeah. And it works. I sat down in Lévis in Quebec before a double Ironman, probably 2002 maybe. And I was talking about this with a bunch of the athletes that were there. You know Susie Dagazon, she was there. I'm loath to mention specific people, but Susie's been very public about her old battle with anorexia and what she's come through. And she did the same. She used this ultra stuff to pull her out of the hole. There's a Shangri-La Rendon's another one. So she's been very, very upfront about what she went through. And this ultra triathlon has helped her. And it's the same with me. I don't have enough fingers and toes to count the number of endurance athletes I know personally who use it as a method of therapy, I guess. Mm-hmm. Personally, I in 2009, I planned a ride. I took off from Cairns, and that was going to be it. I was riding home. I said goodbye to my parents. So I ridden to Sydney, and I was going to ride across the country to Perth, do Ironman, Western Australia, and then fly to Asia. And when the money ran out, that was it. I was going to end my life. But things changed. My brother died in China, which immediately took me out of a different mindset. So now I had to go to China to deal with the funeral, come back, deal with my dad. Then my mother died 7 weeks later, and then I had to help him. And that gave me a focus, a purpose. And that lasted all the way through to when he died in 2018. And so now we start the process again, and it's ongoing.
Yeah.
This is what I talked to Jim Gawley about at length, because he said to me, well, you're not showing up fit. And I said, it's because I can go weeks and weeks and weeks shut in because of this depression. And I just don't want to see people. And so this whole COVID thing, people think it's hard. It's my normal. Not speaking to people is for days on end is normal. And so I'm actually coming through something like that right now. I haven't been in the pool in 3 weeks, and that's because I just don't want to go out and face anyone. It happens. And one day I'll be like an elephant. I'll just go off and that'll be it. And I'm fine with that. But I have, because of the clarity I've gotten with what I'm going to do, I've been able to help others and try to give people a perspective on the mindset of someone like myself who is suffering and why we think the way we do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I know one of the things that happens when you use these races as the goal, as the thing to keep you focused, is then you get that letdown after the race.
Yeah.
How do you handle that? Like you've this has been your focus for so long, and then you go do the event or you do the ride or whatever it is, and now there's got to be that letdown, and then hopefully a chance to find something else. But what happens in that trough afterwards?
Yeah, it is very difficult, especially if you're not in a triathlon community. I come back from rides, a long ride. For example, 2020, I rode 1,000 miles up to Cairns to watch Ironman, turned around, rode back. So I was on the road for 5 weeks. And when you're on the road, you're an unusual character. So people see you at truck stops, they see you camping in rest areas, and they want to know. To me, that shows all that is good in humanity, the generosity, the love, the interest. When I come back here, I'm just another old guy that people don't want to talk to. And so I've gone through that low a lot. And what I had to do here specifically was I had to just get myself a job, not because I necessarily needed one, but I needed the human contact. And I needed to be forced. You have to be here at work at this time. And so that otherwise, I would shut myself in for literally weeks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And your way of helping out these other race directors and sharing your knowledge there, I think that's probably a valuable way for you to keep going as well, because you know that you've got something that other people need, and you sharing that, I think, is important.
It is. I live and breathe, all this, and I live on the Ultraman Australia course, so we've got 50 days to go till Australian race, and I'll be helping there again this year. But one bad side effect of being out of shape was when you've won something, and people expect that person to show up. People who've never met you, they expect that athlete to show up. And when, I've been as much as 25 kilos overweight, and when you're 5'7", it's hard to hide 25 kilos. So you can see the look on people's faces. They go, "No, this guy can't be that dude that won Ultraman twice. No way." And with that, a lot of they assume my knowledge is gone as well. So because I don't look like an athlete, somehow my credibility has gone as well. I suddenly found myself on the outer. The phone calls stopped, the emails stopped. Oh. I find it fascinating. Actually, it's great insight into the way people think.
Yeah. Well, I've been wanting to have you on the podcast for a while, and the thing that kind of sparked it to finally ask you to come on was when you put on Facebook that you wanted to put it out there to the people and say, "Hey, do you think this old guy can do a sub 10 at the Ironman Western Australia with just 10 months of training?" And I thought that was great when I read that. And so what I want to know is, was that just a conversation starter, or are you actually going for that?
It was a bit of both. It was certainly a conversation starter. I believe I can get myself into T2 in the range to do it. But whether I can run it, that's a different thing. And if you were to look at that post and then who came out of the woodwork to answer it, it's very interesting, because the fast guys that answered, like Arno Selyukov and Tony O'Keefe and a few of these guys, they're fast. They're the most reasonable ones. A lot of them are like, "Yeah, give it up, and it's never going to happen." But a lot of the guys who have been in the sport a very long time and look at my history are going, "Well, if you train right, you can do it, or get close." So I think sub 11 hours is probably, given that course as well. Western Australia's flat
course,
flat. It's flat and fast. Yeah. So going in with a little extra weight won't be an issue, but it's that run. So that's what the training's all about now, dealing with having to run.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I was going to ask you. It's like, obviously you're a great swimmer. You don't lose that. You've got so many miles on the bike that's probably not an issue for you. But how does the body hold up for the run after all these years and all these miles?
Well, I am a believer that the fact that I haven't done much run training in the last 10 years is going to help, because my body's not beaten down at all. I see a lot of the guys have coming up with arthritis. Like, I'm 60 next year. I'm 58 now, 59 in September. So I'll be 59 when I roll up to this thing. And a lot of people my age, like who have been fast, they're dealing with all kinds of issues. I'm not. and it's funny how I get checked out. I've been in hospital 3 times since 2017. And the last time was 2 days before Ironman Cairns. I was admitted to the cardiac ward at the Cairns Base Hospital. And they did a stress test on me. The cardiologist walked out after 5 minutes. He said, "He's fine." And the guy conducting the stress test, he said, "Do you want to go for the record?" No one's lasted more than 11 and a half minutes. And they were just trying to get my heart rate up to 155, and they couldn't. And once they got there, it was like 9:45 or something, 9 minutes 45. he said, "Do you want to go?" And I said, "No, I'm done." And the technician said to me, "You're the fittest fat guy I've ever seen in my life." And
I guess that's a compliment, right?
Yeah, totally. But my training is nothing to do with triathlons for the next 4 months. It's all about getting my physical structure able to deal with the stress of the training I will do in 4 months' time.
Mm. Well, to prepare for this, I did look up the Ironman Western Australia 2021 results, which I'm sure you've looked at.
Yeah.
And there were two people in your age group, 50 to 50 or 55 to 59, who their times were, the winner was probably somebody you know, David Boys, 10:03, and then second place, Andrew Fox, 10:49, and then third place jumps to 11:23. So if you went sub 10, you would be winning this thing. And if you went sub 11, you would still have a chance to podium and possibly qualify for Kona. Like, what would that mean for you?
Yeah, that's just weird. When I posted that, Tony O'Keefe said, if you do it, I'll do it. And I think he's in the next age group up.
Oh, that's good, because you don't want to have to compete with him.
Exactly. It's funny. So I'll tell you a roundabout story about that, because I've never met Tony face to face, but we've Facebook, email, whatever, since the 90s. I've qualified for Hawaii a bunch of times. And back in the day, if you were at the after party at Night Moves in Penticton, you would be pretty much given a spot after the roll down, because no one wanted to take the spots. So there were freebies to hand out. But because of my Ultraman win in '94, and because I was sponsored by Boston Pizza, I got a pro slot for '94 and '95, because they were a major sponsor of the race. And I got a pro roll down for Hawaii, so I came 16th out of 31 pros in Ironman Canada that year, time of 10:02, I think it was. And so, I was there drinking at the after party, and Dave Bullock said, "Look, slots rolled through. Do you want it?" And so I'm okay. I happened to be drinking with Lynn McAllister, the Canadian champion at the time. And so we went to the bank the next day, filled the forms, and off we went. Now, back then, you needed your national governing body to sign off on who you were. And so I contacted Triathlon Australia, and they literally said, "Who the hell are you?" No. We're not going to, they didn't care. They didn't care that I'd won Ultraman. They just didn't care. Said, we're not going to sanction you. So then, thankfully, the race director in Hawaii, Dave Bullock, contacted them, and she changed my registration from pro to age group, and the guy on the next rack was Tony O'Keefe. So if you go to the 1995 list of athletes, Tony and I are next to each other. And I've said that to him. I said, we've never met, but we keep connecting all over the place. And so I'd love to see him in Western Australia.
Yeah.
Whether I would go to Kona is another thing.
Yeah.
I don't know. One of the saddest things, I've spent too many years going to races, and when the race is finished, I just sit there by myself. I don't know anyone, where I see all the families hanging out, and I don't have that. Yeah, I don't have the same draw to the big races like that anymore than I used to.
Mm-hmm. Just for a point of reference, what is your Ironman PB?
9 hours and 52.
So that was your Ironman Canada, 1991.
No, 1997.
So you're looking 30 years later to get back to the same time you were on.
Yeah, I think I can go between 10:30 and 11.
Yeah.
But who knows on the day? And I got to subscribe to one of the two. It's going to be, the bike times are so much faster than they used to be. Mm-hmm. Back in the day, if you rode as an age grouper under 5 hours on the bike, you were pretty special, because a lot of the pros weren't. Mm-hmm. But now you look at the bike times and the finish times of some of these age groupers, it's ridiculous.
Yeah.
So,
Well, some
weather.
of the equipment that's powering that is also part
Exactly.
of that now.
Yeah. It's a huge part of it. So, and again, I won't, because I'm riding back across the country after Ironman. So I haven't decided which bike I'm taking, but it's not going to be a TT bike for sure. I have an aero road bike, and I have my old tank Cannondale that I tour with. So I still have to decide which bike I'm taking.
Oh, yeah. Well, you could always just show up and borrow a bike off of someone, I'm sure.
I've done that.
You'll know people there.
Yeah, I've done that a couple of times. I rode Steve Brown's bike in Ultraman Canada one time, and the first time I rode it was riding to the swim start. So I've done stupid stuff like that before.
Well, one of the things I want to get from you as well is people that listen to the podcast. A lot of them are listening for Steve King stories. He's done one on you in a previous episode. And so you're one of the guys that can give us a Steve King story. So can you share with us maybe one of your favorite Steve King stories?
The one I'll tell you is gets more insight into why Steve and Gene and I are so close, and really the sort of guy Steve is. And that goes all the way back to 1994. And this also gives everyone an appreciation of why I'm so loyal to all the people in Penticton. And this goes back to this, this thing when Hawaii broke away from Steve Brown. Because when I was in the winter of 2003 with my girlfriend in Kelowna, I couldn't get a job. And my girlfriend was working at Smitty's as a waitress, and she was supporting the both of us. And it was difficult, like really difficult time. And it got to once spring started rolling around, I'd get on my bike and I would ride from Kelowna to Penticton in March and try to find a job in Penticton and then ride back to Kelowna that day. So I was putting these mega miles in, and people in Penticton started hearing about this. But, I remember standing on the side of the road, they were burning off some grass, trying to warm myself by the side of the road halfway between Penticton and Kelowna. Yeah, so one day, Dave Bullock shows up at our door in our motel in Kelowna and says, "Pack your bags, you're coming with us." And they dragged us both down to Penticton, and Dave went to the Lakeshore Hotel and spoke to the general manager, Dave Price Day, got my girlfriend a job there on the spot. And then Myers Bennett, who worked for a big insurance company in Penticton that sponsored the Peach Classic Triathlon and a few other events, he took me to Boston Pizza and introduced me to Dwayne Jordan. And Dwayne said, "Okay, what do you want?" And I had no idea what's going on, who are these people? And so Dwayne said, "Look, you've got a job." And he goes, "I understand you need money for Ironman." And I went, "What?" So he paid for my Ironman. He paid for all my training. He just gave me cash, $500 right there on the spot. And so that became our introduction to what the people of Penticton are like. Steve, before I started work at Boston Pizza, was living at Dave's house. And Steve said, "Listen, I need my house painted." Because Steve had bought a place in Scarhara Estates, which is essentially halfway between Penticton and Okanagan Falls down the Scarhara Lake. And he said, "I need my house painted. I'll pay you $10 an hour to come and paint my house. But you have to run there." Steve would meet me at Scarhara Beach, and we would run down the length of the lake to his house. And then he'd give me a paintbrush, and I had to start painting his house. And that lasted for
This is Karate Kid kind of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is why I know that Steve knew I needed a purpose. So I'm painting his damn house for him, and I knew it didn't need painting. And a few days later, he said, "Well, come around, look." And this Kiwi guy who was there, Phil Olson, who sadly since died, he was an Ironman guy, married a local girl, and he was one of the local characters. And Steve said, "Now I need you to dig me a pool." And so now we're really in the Mr. Miyagi, mode here. So Steve could have got an excavator in, but no, Phil and I with shovels digging a big hole in his backyard. And every lunchtime, Gene would come down with food and we'd have a few beers, and Steve would say, "Okay, you guys are done," and we'd go home. And this lasted for about 10 days or so. And then Steve figured, okay, that's enough. And I was sent on my way. I started working for Boston Pizza. A month later, I raced against Steve in Ultraman. And that lesson that he taught me, that you just need to keep someone's mind active. You need them to keep them productive. And doesn't matter how hard times are, if you have the support behind you and you're a productive human, you can get through pretty much anything. And that's what Steve taught me by making me paint his damn house and dig a hole in his backyard. It's one of those amazing things, but spending time with him back then, changed me a lot as a human.
Yeah, he's a special guy.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great story. I mean, it kind of ties all these threads together that we've been talking about today. So I think that's probably a great place for us to wrap this one up. Nick, I've appreciated listening to these stories today. I know the listeners will too, and some of the great history that you have. If people do want to reach out to you to get some advice, because you are a bit of a sage in this area, what are some of your, you've mentioned your Slowtwitch handle. What are other ways they can reach out and get in touch?
Yeah, they can. My Hotmail address is mallettnick@hotmail. It's easy. And just on Facebook. I don't do Instagram. I don't do any of that stuff. But just find me on Facebook. I'm easy to find.
Yeah. Well, again, thanks a lot, Nick, for doing this today. And hopefully you're posting some of your training so we can follow along and see how this under 10 in 10 works out for you, or under 11 as the case may be. I will. I'll be starting a Facebook page called Vagabond Road. And so it's 1 year tomorrow until the Indian Pacific Wheel Race starts, which is a race across Australia. And so that's what all this is really training for. So I will be, it's all going to be on Strava, because if it ain't on Strava, it didn't happen. And I will be posting a lot of it. Oh, great. Thanks again, and good luck with all that.
No worries, Larry.
Hey, if you liked what you heard today, please tell a friend and be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. We'd appreciate it if you'd rate and review the show while you're there. Drop the names of the people you think we should interview, and we'll get in touch with them and make that happen. Thank you for listening to 515, the Ultraman Podcast, a production of 55 Enterprises. Now really, go subscribe now before you forget.